In 1946, Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, OP, which stands for Order of Preachers, a Dominican, published an article titled, "Where is the New Theology Leading Us?" in Rome's Angelicum, described as one of the most prestigious theological journals in the world by the Catholic Family News, which reprinted it here in 1998. In the article, Father Garrigou-Lagrange points out several obvious absurdities of the Nouvelle Theology, or New Theology movement, and their consequences. I'll link to the article in the notes. It's only 10 pages and a very worthwhile read, but I'm not going to read the entire article here. At the beginning of the article, Father Garrigou-Lagrange quotes Father Bouillard, spelled Bouillard in the article, on his view of theology. Since spirit evolves, an unchanging truth can only maintain itself by virtue of a simultaneous and correlative evolution of all ideas, each proportionate to the other. A theology which is not current, or does not keep changing, the translator notes, will be a false theology. So according to Father Bouillard, an unchanging truth must keep changing. That is an absurd statement. It's an oxymoron. It contains a contradiction. It is unattributed. There's no source given for such a ridiculous idea. And how could there be? How modernism has succeeded with such ideas can only be that men have wanted the Catholic Church's doctrines to change, and they don't care if they have to logically bend over backwards to accomplish it. And the use of sophistic tricks means that they sat down and thought about how to accomplish it. It was deliberate, and that's diabolical. I want to highlight one particularly devious stratagem that Father Garrigou-Lagrange exposes. Now, if you're a modernist and you want to change the doctrines of the Church, one of the obstacles is that those doctrines are established as authoritative, carrying anathemas if they're denied, as is the case with the doctrines of the Council of Trent. A theologian who wants to be taken seriously can't just gainsay those doctrines. One particular trick, as I'm calling it, was used by Father Henri Bouillard, a French Jesuit who was later expelled from the Faculty of Theology in Fourvière for being identified with the Nouvelle Theology movement. Note exactly what he does in the following excerpt of his that Father Garrigou-Lagrange quotes. Perhaps one might wonder if it is still possible to assert the contingency of the ideas implied in the conciliar definitions. Will it not compromise the irreformable character of these definitions? The Council of Trent, par excellence, in its teaching on justification, employs the idea of formal cause. Consequently, did it not enshrine this term and confer a definitive character upon the idea of grace as a form? Not at all, says the new theologian. It was certainly not the intention of the Council to canonize an Aristotelian idea, nor even a theological idea conceived under the influence of Aristotle. It simply wished to affirm against the Protestants that justification is an interior renewal. Toward this end, it used some shared theological ideas of the times, but one can substitute others for these without modifying the sense of its teaching. Since he can't speak against the doctrines of the Council of Trent without being anathematized, Bouillard plays a sophistic game with the metadata. He doesn't attack the teaching on justification, but instead he denies that the Council would have enshrined the Aristotelian idea of formal cause. Now let's sidetrack a moment. Formal cause is, to both Aristotle and Aquinas, one of the four causes of the nature of things. The four causes are material, formal, efficient, and final. As a Catholic, you've probably heard the concept of the form and matter of the sacraments. So you know it's a pretty important idea, hardly one that can be thrown out or substituted with another one unless you have an underhanded agenda. Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, in the Treatise on Grace, treats of the question whether grace is a quality of the soul. In answer to the first objection, he gives this reply. Grace, as a quality, is said to act upon the soul not after the manner of an efficient cause, but after the manner of a formal cause, as whiteness makes a thing white and justice just. Aquinas uses the phrase formal cause dozens of times in the Summa. So Bouillard is demonstrably wrong, and he clearly has an agenda for using this trick, what I'm calling an attack on the metadata, a redefining based on what? Himself, not St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor of the Church, or the theologians at the Council who knew perfectly well that they were indeed enshrining the Aristotelian ideas used by St. Thomas. In the case that Bouillard is picking apart, the question is justification, and the context is the debate between Catholic and Protestant theology. He seems to take the Catholic side, saying the Council simply wished to affirm against the Protestants that justification is an interior renewal. But by undermining it, he shows that his real agenda is the ultimate Protestantization of Catholic doctrine. I say that because there's no other reason to do this. Why even bring it up? There's no other point to a new theology than the undermining of the existing and unchanging theology. And whose ideas will take the place of Aristotle? Who else addressed the nature of reality like Aristotle? The gist of the dispute over justification is this. The Catholic Church has taught that justification involves an inner transformation of the Christian person. The Protestant idea is that justification is simply God's covering over of our sin while we continue to retain our sinful nature, which is also why they deny purgatory. Regarding the question in the same treatise on grace in the Summa, whether grace is fittingly divided into operating and cooperating grace, Aquinas replies to the second objection, God does not justify us without ourselves, because whilst we are being justified, we consent to God's justification by a movement of our free will. Nevertheless, this movement is not the cause of grace, but the effect. Hence, the whole operation pertains to grace. If justification requires a movement of our free will, then it must be transformative and not just a covering over. And this is why we emphasize that Mary gave her fiat, her yes to God, by way of showing that she exercised her free will in doing so.